London, England, July 1978. Salvationists assemble here from all over the world. The occasion is the 1978 International Congress of the Salvation Army. 50,000 will gather from the 82 countries in which the Army operates today. As they salute the General on the Horse Guards Parade, where the Queen reviews her troops, we're reminded of the Congress way back in 1904, when William Booth himself stood at the saluting base. The young army of those days was no less joyful and determined than the one today. Today's army is many times larger than the army of 1904 and operates in every continent and climate. It is proud to count in its ranks people of almost every race and color. The army of today cherishes its past, and many of these Salvationists visiting England for the first time take the opportunity of going to London's East End to see where William Booth began his work way back in 1865. Here, in the Whitechapel Road, near a public house called the Blind Beggar, he set up a tent and preached to the heedless, godless crowd. Today, a statue of William Booth marks the spot. There's no doubt that he would be delighted if he could see this great crowd gathering in the famous Empire Pool, Wembley, for the opening of the 1978 International Congress. The Congress marks the fact that it is 100 years since the name Salvation Army was first adopted. Perhaps nothing sets the seal of approval on the first century of the Army's work more completely than the presence of none other than Prince Charles.
It is a great honor and also an enormous pleasure to be able to come here today to this Congress and to pay my own small tribute to an army, the soldiers of which I frequently encounter during my overseas travels.
For those Salvationists who have gathered together here from the far ends of the earth, this is a time of inspiration and rededication. But these members of the Army didn't gather together only to find inspiration and fellowship. Many of them attend Bible study sessions held daily at the International Training College and at other centers.
Piece of scripture for a Salvation Army Congress.
The Congress includes in its diverse program an international social and missionary conference. The presence in London of so many Army personnel from all over the world is an opportunity too good to be missed. Doctors, nurses, social workers are here. People who work in every area of human need, from the cradle to the grave, and beyond. The task is how better to organize the Army to achieve even more in the future. Officers from many parts of the world exchange experiences. But the viewpoint of the Third World is summed up best by a major from Sri Lanka.
My paper is short and sweet. My paper is one under the main heading of a world survey of human need. And perhaps I may be excused for emphasizing that nowhere is human need more heartbreakingly seen than in the Third World. Poverty, hunger, homelessness, destitution, disease, on a scale never experienced in the affluent West. What is this Third World? The socially and materially disadvantaged countries of our world. They have the compassion and the imagination to make plans for development, but their hopes will be stillborn without the help of the Western world's financial and technical resources. Indira Gandhi once said, "What's this about a third world? We are one world." She's right. We are interdependent, interresponsible, whether we are first, second, or third worlds. We of the third world are not asking for your charity, but for you to share your resources, your know-how with us for the betterment of the one world in which we all live and for which God had made us responsible. What can you do to help us?
As though in answer to her question, a group of the Salvation Army's world leaders gathered as soon as the International Congress had ended at Sunbury Court, the delightful 18th century mansion where successive generals of the army are elected. It stands close beside the River Thames. In this peaceful setting, so different from the overcrowded, needy regions of the Third World they aim to help, international leaders of the army gathered with officers from international headquarters to discuss ways of extending help to the nations where need is greatest. In the very room in which the High Council meets when a new general is to be elected, the delegates gather.
I should immediately introduce the guest who's on the platform. This is His Excellency, the Honorable Paul Martin, the High Commissioner for Canada to the Court of St. James, a great friend of the Army all through his life, and one of Canada's great statesmen. Make him feel at home right away.
Another important guest was Andrew Grossman, representing the United States ambassador. The symposium is chaired by Commissioner Harry Williams, head of the newly created Department of Planning and Development at International Headquarters.
And so from its earliest days, Salvationists have been compassionately involved in relieving human distress. Today we meet as representatives of powerful organizations who are pledged to help us in bringing hope to the most needy in the Third World. General Arnold Brown, by his presence and participation in this conference, shows his deep concern that the Salvation Army shall be involved to the limit of its strength in projects designed to improve the lot of the world's poorest sons and daughters. And we are inviting him now to speak to us on Dedicated to Development.
I wish for Commissioner Williams and those associated with him every success as they pursue the tasks that have been assigned to this new Department of Planning and Development. I think that the Salvation Army's world must be the whole world. And I want the Army in these days to recapture something of the genius and the imagination and the spirit and the compassion of William Booth, who in his own lifetime reached out to so many parts of the world. The challenge of the world is still ours, and we have equal dedication in these days with the Salvation Army of those years ago. There were three chief elements that revealed themselves at the time of the Army's genesis, and they must continue to have their place if our goodly heritage is to survive. They are the big three of all effective and lasting humanitarian enterprise, and I speak of head and hand and heart. William and Catherine Booth, the Army's founders, never lost their heads. They used them. There was mind and thought in all that they did. They believed not only in knowing what they were doing, but why they were doing it. Now, for a few moments, let's think about the hand of the Salvation Army. The hand not only offered soup and soap, but, metaphorically speaking, reached into the diseased vitals of darkest England. In the early 1900s, the hand of the Army waved placards of protest in Tokyo, waved them so vigorously that an escape route was provided for unfortunate victims imprisoned in the brothels of Japan. But the hand that held the placards also held bricks and a plumb line. And the first missionary hospital was erected at Nagercoil in India. And not only was the hand skilled, but it was gentle, as Javanese lepers discovered to their healing and to their joy. The hand of which we speak is the hand of Major John Dudley Gardner, OBE, doling out his steaming porridge to the emaciated men and women who emerged from the busties of Calcutta, and who, hearing the horn of his station wagon, whisper to each other, "Christ is coming, Christ is coming." Somehow, instinctively, intuitively, if you like, we know that all we do with head and hand falls short of our Lord's example unless, like him, our heart is moved. Unless, in the language of a 17th century poet, we open the floodgate of the deeper heart. If the Salvation Army's motto is, "with hand to man," it is first of all, "with heart to God." To introduce a man or woman to God is still the highest form of community service and the best thing we can do for anybody. The founder, William Booth, on his 81st birthday said, "All the social activity of the Army is the outcome of the spiritual life of its members. And all social service must be based on the spiritual, or it will amount to very little in the end. And that is why, as we reflect upon our heritage, and with care and dedication bear it into a new future, there abideth these three: head, hand, and heart, but the greatest of these is heart."
Fortunately, the nations of the West are finding that they have hearts, and they are increasingly following the dictates of those hearts. Governments are setting funds aside to help the Third World. And one of the most generous in this respect is Canada. The next speaker, Mr. Perenbam, is the Secretary of the Canadian International Development Agency handling this money.
General Brown, Your Excellency, Mr. Gershman, Commander Williams, and friends. Across our planet, over 1 billion people are churning in one of history's greatest upheavals. The gulf between the rich nations and the poor nations in our world is wider than it was at the time of the French Revolution 200 years ago, and it's growing. According to recent figures put out by the World Bank, over 1 billion people don't have access to safe drinking water or any kind of public health. Over 700 million are seriously malnourished. Whenever there's a famine or a cyclone or a great disaster, or whenever we go on a basis of relief, it's always easy to raise money. But it's often much more difficult to get money for those innovative things where you are trying to begin something, to begin a community on a new path in helping it to help itself. Perhaps new teaching methods, new ways of increasing food production, of developing local resources. And we in CEDA are particularly anxious to support the kind of activities for which you cannot get money from other sources, even though it may involve a measure of risk. As long as we are dealing with an outfit, an organization, and a movement with the integrity of the Salvation Army, there is no question in our minds that we know the money will be well spent.
The largest sums of money available in the world today for Third World projects are provided by the United States. At the Symposium is the representative of the United States of America Aid Organization, Mr. Bergin, who speaks on working in partnership with the Salvation Army.
I'll try to deal with two main aspects of why a partnership, how we might envisage that partnership can work in practice. Certainly, the major objective that we share is to work to enable poor communities overseas to lift themselves out of poverty. The U.S. Congress directed our agency to change its programs, to endeavor to deal more directly with basic human needs for adequate food and nutrition, for access to low-cost health services, for basic education and training. I'll quote from the legislation: U.S. bilateral development assistance should give the highest priority to undertakings submitted by host governments which directly improve the lives of the poorest of their people and their capacity to participate in the development of their countries. As part of this change in approach, the U.S. Congress directed our agency to do more in conjunction with private voluntary agencies.
Naturally, there are conditions to be complied with before money will be given. Frequently, both the United States and Canadian governments, and other governments as well, ask that the first 25 or 50% be provided by the voluntary organization, such as the Salvation Army, receiving a grant. This is known as matching money, and careful consideration must be given to such a grant, as discussed by Commissioner Nelting.
The matching fund aspect of this, as well as giving careful thought to how we use what we know to be self-denial or world service monies that are given by our own people, and finding these either 50% or 25% matching funds is a major problem for us, since we do not have a vast constituency of people who are the single millionaires about which we've heard in South America, but rather we are more or less poor people, and we do need to find those kind of matching dollars from some other source apart from our own people.
Envoy Jan Filius from Holland had something to say on this important matter of where these matching funds might be found.
There's a lot of money available in Europe for this sort of thing. In my own country, in the Netherlands, the Netherlands and Sweden are the ones with the highest percentage of development aid of the government budget. We, as the Salvation Army, we relate to what is called the Interchurch Cooperation Committee for Development Aid, and the money available to this committee is something around 30 to 40 million American dollars a year. And that's only for the Protestant section. We have in our meeting this morning heard about the other countries. Switzerland is already mentioned, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, the Scandinavian countries. There is, I think, one country which we have not called upon enough, and that is Germany. But there are enormous amounts of funds available.
Perhaps we should let an officer from one of the Scandinavian countries speak for them. Major Ingrid Lister talks about the funds available in Norway.
I think that Norway has changed its policy very much, and they seem to have a lot of money. I understand that they haven't quite known how to use all the money, because I think it's about 1% now of the gross national income. And they say they want to spread their help, and they can do that through the private organizations. And so I feel that we could do a great deal more than we have been doing up to the present time.
A country that is generally considered to be very rich is Switzerland. Major Hildegard Ruch talks about the support that has been forthcoming.
And we have also a tremendous help from the Swiss government, from the technical assistance for volunteer service. So it helps us to prepare our volunteers and
Having heard of the surprisingly numerous sources of funds available in Europe, in addition to the even larger monies in the United States and Canada, most of the delegates are thinking, how do we set about getting some of these funds? The next speaker, Colonel Ernest Miller, director of the Salvation Army World Service Organization, Washington, usually known as SORSO, tells them how to begin.
To begin the process by which to obtain some operational program grants. Notice, if you will, on page 8, Roman numeral 1 talks about early consultation. At the top is IHQ, as it has always been in our relationships in the Salvation Army. Now, somewhere down here
what color do you put that in?
The blue for purity. Down here is your territory. And the fundamental communications always are between IHQ and the territory. But in the country where you are, there may be a USAID mission. And it is appropriate that in your country you should talk to the people at the USAID mission, because that mission is there to make basic decisions. The USAID mission in your country has authority under present policy in the United States government to approve programs and projects up to a maximum of $500,000. Now that's £250,000, which is a pretty good sized project by Salvation Army standards. That means that that mission in that country has the authority to approve projects that big without ever referring back to Aid Washington in the United States. Of course, there will be communication between those two entities. The most important word in our relationship with other organizations is the word partnership. We must understand that whether we relate to a government organization or to another private and voluntary organization, we relate as partners on a level of equality. In no sense will we ever be subordinate or subservient to another organization. If we go to speak to a government group, we must understand that we have something to offer to that government group. The government group wants the Salvation Army for its expertise, for its network of resources, for its skill and its experience in relating to people where they are and where the needs are. And we offer that resource when we speak to a government group. When we speak to a voluntary organization, we speak as peers, as equals, working together in a common purpose. We must learn, therefore, to stand tall, to stand with the confidence of the organization which we represent. We are a part of a whole, a part of a network that is the Salvation Army. We are not ourselves alone.
The overseas officers have heard where funds come from, and they've heard how to deal with other organizations. But how should they deal with their own organization, International Headquarters of the Salvation Army? Commissioner Williams offers some guidance on the subject.
There are large funds available in the Western democracies which are intended to raise the living standards of the third world countries. Our problem is, how do we get that money, and how should we present our case such that it will win acceptance? Projects like bridegrooms are of great variety. Sources of income, like brides, also have varied priorities. That's a fact of life. Now, our task at IHQ is to marry the right partners. Now, that's very, very important. And I would add something further here. I'm getting a lot of suggestions from behind. I'll add this point, that we do not like clandestine marriages or runaway marriages. I think you get the sweet music. But now, when we come to speak of the handling of project applications, we start as usual with IHQ, the Overseas Department, which now has not only the area international secretaries, but an international secretary for planning and development. And the handling of projects may be by a variety of ways. We might start from here, for example. You might send a form from your territory to your international secretary, and there will be immediate dialogue between the international secretaries on that submission. It might be from the Department of Planning and Development going down to your territory, and if your answer is one of interest, we may move on to a feasibility study, which IHQ, through SOSO funds, will be able to cover. On the other hand, the link with the funding agency that is chosen may well go through the territorial headquarters in the donor country, so that the first application would be handled by a national of that country to the donor agency in it. On the other hand, you in your territory might have direct contact with the regional office of that funding agency, and it might so be stated on that initial application form which you send to us. Look at the bottom and just read full communication at all stages. Now, this is one of our weaknesses as an army. We're not alone in this, it's a world weakness. It's knowing what the other one is doing and always remembering to tell the people that ought to know what is going on. You can complain about IHQ, IHQ complains about you. It's a joint, it's an up and down process, and let us go away from here with this very clearly in mind. You can never go wrong, if your heart is honest, in communicating what you're doing. But you can miss out a lot of help and may even miss the success of a scheme because you forget to tell IHQ or even your THQ in some cases exactly what you have in mind and what you've already done. So full communication at all stages.
Finally, the delegates joined in a general discussion session. They described projects they hope to carry out.
We are doing our country. We have the plan for the forecraft.
Asked questions in various languages. From India came a story of a housing project made necessary by a tidal wave that had made thousands homeless.
People could not afford to build this with brick and mortar, so we have decided to build these houses in a traditional manner, but to make them strong. And to this end, we supplied 13 pieces of wood to the people, and we taught them how to construct these houses. And also, cross beaming has been done to give strength to the structure.
Homeless people in need, a story typical of the Third World. It's happening all the time. The desperate need for funds to rebuild their houses. But at least we know that an increasing amount of money is being made available by the governments and the other agencies in the West. And because money was forthcoming in this case, the story has a happy ending.
Now there are thousands of houses. They are known as Model Salvation Army houses.
In conclusion, a sound piece of advice for all those at the end of the symposium who are thinking, how do I apply successfully for a grant to carry out my favorite project?
It is extremely important in the preparation of any project that adequate planning be made for accountability to the donor and for public information. It is naive to suppose that in this day and age, any donor of funds is going to give money to anybody for that person to do as he pleases. Every organization which receives money for any program must expect to report back to the donor what they have done with the money and to report to the public how they have spent the funds. In order that the public may be knowledgeable about what you are doing and may be encouraged to give, you have to tell the story of what you are doing. And you must plan to tell the story the same instant you plan to do the task at all. Telling the story and doing the task cannot be separated. They must be part and parcel of each other. If we have sometimes failed to win support for our projects, it is because those who support us have not known enough about what we plan to do. The public cannot give intelligently unless we tell them our plans, unless we tell them of the needs and of how we hope to deal with the needs. And our donors cannot be expected to continue to trust us unless we are able to show them by proper methods of accountability exactly how we have been good stewards of the resources they have given us.
In conclusion, Lieutenant Colonel Dorothy Purser from the Caribbean speaks on behalf of the Third World.
I truly appreciate this opportunity of being involved in this culmination of this Congress for this selected group of people, because when we heard about it, I was really excited because we are grateful recipients of funding from the agencies that are involved in this symposium. I know you would all like to say something, but I hope I can express your feelings to those responsible for suggesting and implementing and planning this unique and timely symposium on planning and development, bringing together for mutual sharing the intentions, the hopes, the fears, the concerns, and the challenges of the several countries represented here, from developing and developed nations. This enlargement and intensification of efforts to obtain the necessary financial and technical assistance needed to achieve and maintain the quality of life for people, which is a basic human right, occurs at a significant and crucial time in the world's history. We are making history ourselves in the Salvation Army. We do not see it as patronizing. We see it as sharing cooperatively. We see it as with mutual objectives based on the Christian perspective of development and humanization.
We thank the Colonel for that very wonderful and masterly presentation. She has been bothered with the debate that has been going on and preparing that great speech at the same time, and that really was wonderful. Thank you very much, Colonel.
God be in my head and in my understanding. God be in my head and in my understanding.
And so the delegates returned to their countries. The Third World delegates to the problems and needs of their people, inspired by the knowledge that help will be forthcoming from the nations of goodwill around the world.